Welcome back. We continue with the story. Dr. Essop Pahad was also a colossal of the South African struggle against apartheid and the former minister in post-Apartheid South Africa. And to get a better sense of his role in the liberation of this country, we are now joined by the chairperson of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, and she joins us via our video link. Geraldine, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition. What does this loss mean to you as somebody who shared a lot in common with the Dr. Essop Pahad, and also somebody you were also in the same cabinet in? What does it mean to you, and what should it mean for South Africa?
I think for South Africa and for me personally, this is clearly a loss. And I think, we've seen a lot of reference to what is called the passing of an era. And I think this, in a real sense, reflects a bit of that. Because we're talking about someone who has grown up in the Congress movement. He was fortunate to have been born into a family of freedom fighters. He joined the Transvaal Youth Indian Congress, and through that was engaged in a number of struggles of that time. I think the big question, and this is a matter that has been and will be raised going forward, is Comrade Essop Pahad being part of the successor generation or the generation of youth between 1944 and 1999. The question would arise, how far has the successor generations fulfilled the undertakings it formally inscribed in golden words in a binding compact? And I'm actually quoting the words of another leader. Our constitution that gives expression to the hopes of generations, past, present, and future. The honest answer to that question will also give a firm indication of how this generation, for its part, had brought up its own successes, will be ready and be prepared to fulfill a new mission. And I think that's really the test that will be there. As a foundation, we really take a bow at this point. In the past, we would have said, this is a moment during which we hand over the spear, because he belonged to a generation that were brought up by the brave and young combatants who formed the ANC Youth League in 1944 and proved themselves worthy of their successes. Hence, the question that I've just raised earlier. He was born, as has been stated, on the 21st of June 1939, so during the winter solstice, if I can put it that way, in Zwazirenica in the northwest. And hence today at his funeral, there was a contingent that came from the northwest, both reflective of his place of birth, but also a province in which Comrade Essop mobilized, organized, and built structures. And a province that he was also quite critical about in more recent times, as he was about the movement, in terms of ensuring that we don't lose what the essence of the African National Congress and the Congress movement has been. And yes, this is quite a moment, and we can talk about his time in exile as well. We can talk about his time in cabinet. Yeah. But what I think there is absolutely no question about is that this was a committed comrade, a true patriot, one who was committed to the Congress from the time of his political consciousness up to the end.
And you also speak of his time in cabinet, and you were with him during former President Thabo Mbeki's tenure in office as part of that cabinet. How would you describe him as an MP and your engagements back then?
You know, Comrade Essop Pahad was part of the contingent. We were part of the contingent of parliamentarians, the first legislators of a democratic parliament. And he was someone who was quite committed, one, to the development of this constitution that I talked about. But when in cabinet, committed to putting in place policies that would ensure the progressive change that was required, both in the specific area that he was appointed to, and that was around women, youth, and people with disabilities, in terms of both policy making, setting up the gender machinery that we worked on collectively, building institutions, looking at program implementation that will contribute towards making a difference, because we came from a past that was so fractured and fragmented, and we had to look at inclusive future. And he was quite relentless in making this happen. Sometimes he was impatient about it, but always rigorous. And he didn't limit his role in cabinet to that of a specific portfolio. He was also engaging on all issues that affected government, because after all, this was a cabinet that acted as a cabinet led by a president, and we never saw ourselves as a federation of ministers, but rather a collective that had to contribute towards change as the pioneers.
All right, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, thank you so much for your time here on The Late Edition. Unfortunately, we are out of time.